Lucas Sinclair enters the scene as the kind of character who at first glance seems simple, the impulsive, competitive, and stubborn boy of the group. But Stranger Things never delivers anything that shallow. Behind the always alert look and the defensive posture, Lucas is the friend who tries to balance courage with fear, loyalty with distrust. Someone who is growing up too fast in a world that became dangerous too soon. He is the improvised strategist, the friend who questions when everyone accepts the boy who prefers to doubt before getting hurt. But he is also the same Lucas who puts his body in front of those he loves, who faces monsters even while trembling inside, and who tries in every possible way to protect what is left of his own childhood. His journey is about trust, maturity, and the weight of being strong when no one taught you how to be. And that is exactly why Lucas Sinclair is one of the most human, real, and emotionally complex characters in Stranger Things. If you are a fan of cinema psychology and want to understand the mind behind your favorite character, subscribe to the channel so you do not miss any video. But first, comment below which character you want me to analyze here on the channel. Now, let us go to the video. When we meet Lucas Sinclair for the first time, he seems like that friend who pretends to always be prepared, but deep down observes everything with almost surgical attention. He is not just the angry guy of the group, he is the emotional thermometer of the boys, even when he tries to hide it behind a tough facade. He grew up in a structured family with strong values, and that shaped his sense of responsibility from an early age. Lucas is the kind of person who carries more weight than he admits. And of course, none of that stops him from wanting to play the hero, even when the world turns upside down. Paragrapho 2, his childhood with Mike, Will, and Dustin was marked by adventures that, to a certain extent, were safe bike role-playing games, school that silly rivalry as always. But when chaos settles in, Hawkins Lucas discovers that courage is not just shouting, "Let us go," and running forward. It is also doubting, hesitating, and still moving forward. He is the friend who raises an eyebrow before entering the woods, but enters anyway. And this cautious posture ironically makes him one of the most trustworthy. Paragrapho 3, at the beginning of the series, he seems to be the most skeptical of the group, the one who tries to rationalize everything all the time. But there is an interesting detail there. Skepticism most of the time is born from the fear of losing control. And Lucas has always wanted control. Maybe that is why he observes so much before acting. He is the kind of boy who, if he could, would make an emotional checklist before facing any demogorgon, and of course, the universe never gives that time. Paragrapho for his story gains new contours when Eleven enters the scene. Lucas sees her presence as a threat to the group's balance. And honestly, who has never been resistant when someone new arrives and completely changes the dynamic among friends? He does not admit it, but he feels that fear of losing his place, fear that many of us carry silently. Paragrapho 5. As conflicts grow, Lucas matures faster than he would like. It feels as if the world demands that he leave childhood behind almost by force, as if he were facing an accelerated version of his own maturity. And that messes with him. He does not want to be just another one in the group. He wants to be useful. He wants to be heard. He wants to be an essential part of it all. It is funny how in many moments Lucas resembles that friend who says, "I am fine," but actually wanted someone to ask again. Paragrapho 6, throughout the story, he also discovers that not all strength appears as a well-thrown punch or a brilliant idea at the right moment. Sometimes strength is recognizing that you were wrong. And Lucas does that with a rare honesty. He goes back, reflects, changes his mind, and that is much more courageous than holding a slingshot in front of an interdimensional monster. This kind of vulnerability creates an emotional layer that few notice at first. Paragrapho 7, Lucas grows up in an environment where being resilient is practically mandatory. He feels more than the others, the weight of expectations and comparisons. Have you noticed how he tries to prove his own worth all the time that runs through the entire series? And if we think about it, how many times have we tried to do the same in real life, proving that we are competent, strong, important, even when the heart is tight? Lucas lives this tension with an almost involuntary transparency. Paragrapho 8, as time goes on, the world around him becomes more chaotic, and Lucas is forced to find an internal balance so he does not get lost in this whirlwind. That is when his journey stops being only about facing monsters out there and starts being about facing the monsters inside him. And that is exactly where his story begins to gain new layers, opening space for the conflicts that will shape everything that comes ahead, including some much more complex than he imagined. When we observe Lucas at the beginning of the series, we can feel that his skepticism is not just free suspicion, it is almost an emotional shield he uses not to be caught off guard. He has the energy of someone who prefers to see proof before believing, because believing too much has already hurt at some point in life. It is interesting how some people grow up having to prove themselves all the time, and Lucas seems to have lived that. And then, when things get strange in Hawkins, this internal conflict starts to boil. Deep down, he tries to balance head and heart, but that is never as easy as it seems. This skepticism appears strongly in the first interactions with Eleven. Lucas looks at her like someone trying to decipher a dangerous enigma, and that says much more about his fear than about her. After all, trusting is giving someone permission to disappoint you, and Lucas is not ready for that right away. This tension is very common in those who grew up learning to protect themselves before attaching. He does not admit it, but the idea that the group could change without him having control made him restless. At the same time, there is in him a huge desire to believe, to jump in, to be part of something bigger. But this desire clashes with the so-called voice of prudence that usually speaks louder when we are afraid of being left behind. Lucas is that friend who says, "Calm down, guys," even when he is dying of curiosity inside. And this creates an internal dilemma that is fun to watch, almost like seeing two versions of him arguing all the time. What is interesting is that as the danger increases, his skepticism starts to wear out. It is as if the world were pushing Lucas toward a choice. Either he trusts his friends and the absurd evidence in front of him, or he stays still, trying to explain the inexplicable. And staying still has never been very much his style. Many people live this without noticing that phase of life, when you need to trust even without guarantees, because the path does not move forward without that leap. Lucas has a sharp mind, always analyzing, always calculating risks. But this same ability, when in excess, also holds him back. He realizes that overthinking sometimes hinders more than it helps. And that is when an interesting lesson emerges. His reasoning is a strength, but also a prison when it becomes a crutch. Have you seen when someone uses too much logic not to admit they are afraid? Lucas does that all the time, and that is why his journey is so human. His relationship with the group forces this conflict to surface even more intensely. When Mike and Dustin start trusting Eleven, Lucas feels as if he is being left behind emotionally. And that hurts at any age, does it not? He tries to keep his posture, but deep down he just wanted to be sure that he was still important to his friends. And that is when skepticism works as a mask, trying to hide the discomfort he is afraid to verbalize. The most beautiful part of this conflict is that Lucas learns to give up being right in order to be together. He begins to understand that trusting is not an act of stupidity, but an act of courage. And this transformation is gradual, full of small stumbles, arguments, and reconciliations. No one wakes up one day and says, "Now I fully trust everything." Lucas is living proof that trust is built little by little, almost always after skepticism fails for the 1,000th time. And even when he learns to trust more, this skepticism does not disappear, it only changes function. Instead of being a wall, it becomes a compass. Lucas discovers that he can trust without losing his critical sense, and he can doubt without moving away from those he loves. This mix, half unstable and half fascinating, opens the door to the next conflict, one that stirs even deeper emotions and directly affects how he deals with the world around him. From an early age, Lucas carries that uncomfortable feeling that he needs to prove his own worth all the time. He does not talk about it openly, but the way he reacts to situations shows this almost silent fear of not being good enough. It is as if he thought that if he did not do everything right, he would be easily replaced, and that is so common in adolescence that it hurts to recognize. Lucas feels inside a pressure that he himself invented, and that grows with him. This fear appears especially in the comparisons with his own friends. Mike always seems like the leader, Dustin is the creative brain, Will has all the sensitivity that awakens care, and Lucas, he wonders where he fits. The feeling is of always being in the background, trying to occupy a space that never seems entirely his. And this awakens the typical restlessness of those seeking identity in the midst of chaos. He just wanted to feel that he was also indispensable. This insecurity becomes evident when he tries to take on the role of someone strong and resolute. You know, that person who seems always ready to face anything but inside wonders if they can really handle it? Lucas lives that every day. He tries to be firm, to be brave, to be overly adult too soon. And in this trying too hard, we notice the fear behind it, and if even then he is not enough. In many moments, Lucas ends up exaggerating his actions because he wants others to see him as someone reliable. It is almost like an emotional defense mechanism. He wants to be seen, he wants to be useful, he wants to be essential. This happens to so many people who do not realize they are living in performance mode, always trying to prove something to someone. Lucas is a clear picture of that phase of life when we seek validation without even understanding why. When he disagrees with his friends or gets irritated, it is not always because he is angry. Many times it is because he feels he is not being taken seriously. And this frustration creates small emotional outbursts that actually hide much deeper fragilities. You can feel that he just wanted to hear a "you matter to us." And how many times have we wanted exactly the same thing? This conflict also intensifies when new people enter the group. Every change in dynamics makes Lucas nervous. He tries to appear calm, but that light paranoia shows up in the details. The silent doubt, will they still need me? It is a cruel thought, right, and at the same time very human. Lucas learns the hard way that belonging is not something you earn by proving anything. It is something built through bonding, not performance. Behind the physical strength and the more grounded posture there is a boy trying not to be swallowed by the shadow of his own friends. The truth is that he never needed to compete, but he still does not know that. His journey has a lot to do with accepting that being enough is not about being the best, but about being genuine. But recognizing that requires a maturity that not every teenager has that early, and that is when his story gains even denser emotional layers. This fear of being insufficient ends up pushing Lucas toward decisions that will shape his relationships with others, especially with Max. He begins to realize that to be truly important, he needs to open up more, trust more, allow himself to feel more. And this vulnerability, even if scary, prepares the ground for a deep next conflict, exactly the one that will stir his feelings in a completely new way. Vulnerabilidade afetiva e o relacionamento com Max. When Max enters Lucas's life, she triggers in him a type of insecurity. He had never faced the so-called emotional vulnerability. It is as if he who always tried to appear strong and secure suddenly realized that liking someone leaves us completely exposed, and Lucas never knew how to deal with that very well. He feels he needs to be interesting enough for her to stay close, but at the same time, he fears she will see the parts of him he tries to hide even from himself. Max, with that sharp and free personality, dismantles Lucas' emotional defenses with an irritating ease in the best way. She challenges him to feel, to speak, to express himself, and that affects him deeply. The truth is, Lucas was not used to someone so direct, so full of herself, so in control of her own story. And then comes that inevitable emotional clash. He wants to keep up with her, but is afraid he cannot. It is like trying to run beside a hurricane. Their relationship has that teenage charm that mixes affection with chaos, laughter with arguments, and a generous dose of trial and error. Lucas often tries to understand Max's mind as if she were a secret code impossible to decipher. And honestly, who has never been through that? In their first more serious crush, he feels that each of her steps sets the rhythm of the relationship, and that shakes the emotional control he always tried to maintain. Vulnerability appears with greater strength in the moments when Max shuts down, especially after the tragedies she experiences. Lucas realizes that liking someone does not only mean exchanging jokes in the hallway, it means being there when the other person collapses, and that is frightening. He does not know if he can be emotional support for someone so marked by pain, but even so, he tries. He tries because his affection for her surpasses the fear, and this reveals a side of Lucas that he himself did not know existed. In the most intense situations, when Max allows him to come closer, Lucas shows himself in an almost transparent way. You can see on his face the relief of finally being near her and the terror of not knowing what to do with all of that. He feels that every gesture matters, every word can either hurt or heal, and this emotional responsibility is something that even adults find difficult to handle. Imagine a boy growing up in the middle of monsters, traumas, and expectations. Their relationship also pushes Lucas toward a different kind of maturity. He learns to deal with more complex feelings, the kind that do not fit into a quick conversation or a joke among friends. He understands that loving someone involves patience, sensitivity, and, mainly, accepting that he will not always have the answers. Max shows this to him not with long speeches, but with heavy silences and looks that say more than words. Another important detail is that Lucas discovers that showing affection does not make him weak, quite the opposite. He realizes that when he opens up, when he expresses what he feels, he becomes stronger than in any physical battle. And this perception is transformative. The relationship with Max becomes a kind of emotional mirror that forces Lucas to look at himself in a way he had been avoiding. It is beautiful to watch this process even when it is painful. And it is precisely this relationship filled with highs and lows, insecurities and courage that prepares Lucas for the emotional role he will play in the darkest moments of the story, especially when danger strikes Max brutally and forces him to face feelings even deeper than he imagined. That is when vulnerability stops being only a conflict and begins to become a strength that will guide him into the next chapter of his evolution. When the threat of Vecna emerges, Lucas finds himself facing a type of courage completely different from what he was used to. It is no longer only about facing visible monsters or running through dark hallways. Now it is about protecting someone he loves from an enemy that attacks from within. This kind of emotional courage catches Lucas off guard. He realizes that it is useless to be only fast or smart. He needs to be present. He needs to be constant. And this affects his perception of who he is. During the plans against Vecna, it becomes clear that Lucas takes on a more mature role within the group. He stops being only the practical guy and becomes someone who emotionally sustains a part of the battle. The scene with him beside Max shows this with such force that it almost feels physical. Lucas understands that the fight is not only against the supernatural, it is against despair itself. And keeping someone emotionally safe during an attack like that requires more strength than any improvised weapon. His practical courage, the one that makes him act quickly, improvise, and physically protect whoever is vulnerable, becomes secondary compared to the emotional courage he is forced to develop. It is beautiful to observe how these two forces collide inside him. On one hand, he wants to solve everything through action. On the other, he realizes that the real confrontation happens in a territory he never mastered. It is as if he had to learn a new emotional language in a hurry. And honestly, Lucas excels at it. Even trembling, even afraid, even with his heart collapsing inside, he stays there with Max in a way that few teenagers could. He does not run, he does not break down, he does not give up. He carries the weight of a situation that would make any adult fall apart, and he does so with such genuine love that it is impossible not to feel the impact. It is one of the biggest emotional leaps in his journey. When Vecna attacks Max, Lucas's reaction is visceral. There is no pose, no control, no rationality. It is his soul reacting. And it is in this moment that we see how much he has transformed. That skeptical, distrustful boy, full of fear of not being enough, is now completely open, vulnerable, stripped of any emotional mask. He faces terror with his heart in his hands, and that makes him greater than any slingshot or strategy. The fight against Vecna demands something from Lucas that he had never experienced. The courage to accept that he might not be able to save the person he loves. This is an enormous emotional blow. It is almost as if the universe is testing the strength of his heart and not the strength of his fists. Lucas discovers that courage sometimes means holding someone even when you cannot stop the pain, and that is one of the hardest lessons in life. This experience completely redefines his personality. From that moment on, Lucas stops being only the friend who tries to keep everything under control and becomes someone who deeply understands the importance of being present. He realizes that loving someone also means facing the worst pain beside that person. And this understanding matures Lucas in a way that no physical battle ever could. He grows emotionally almost in a rush because the situation demands it. This fight against Vecna, filled with losses, fears, and raw courage, opens within Lucas a new emotional layer that will influence all his future choices. It is as if he had crossed an internal portal and now sees the world with a depth he did not have before. And it is exactly this forced, intense, and transformative maturation that will lead Lucas to the next major movement of his journey. The intense experiences Lucas goes through end up rearranging his emotional foundations in a way that cannot be ignored. He stops being that boy who only reacts to chaos and becomes someone who deeply understands the impact of his own choices. Life is no longer a succession of dangerous adventures. It becomes a delicate emotional field where each decision matters. This shapes Lucas in a quiet but firm way. And we perceive this maturation in the details, in the subtleties, in the smallest gestures. After facing such great losses, Lucas begins to see the world with an almost premature clarity. He starts to value presence, real connections, and emotional stability like never before. It is interesting how trauma, when processed with support, sometimes awakens a deeper awareness of life, and Lucas feels this deeply. He understands that he cannot push feelings under the rug. They come back, and they come back strong. His relationship with Max also leaves important marks on the way he perceives love. Lucas learns that loving is not only about feeling, it is about sustaining. It is not only about wanting, it is about caring. And this influences the way he approaches people after everything he has lived. He becomes more attentive, more empathetic, more sensitive to what others carry. It is as if his emotional radar had gained new levels of precision. And this makes him someone far more aware of the needs around him. At the same time, Lucas develops an emotional sense of responsibility that did not exist before. He realizes that he can be a point of support, but not the only one. He learns that he cannot save everyone, and that this does not mean failure. This is maturity. And this understanding distances him from that desperate need to be enough all the time. He discovers that his value is not in solving everything, but in being available, whole, human. Another evident change is the way he deals with his fears. Lucas stops treating them as enemies and starts seeing them as signals. He understands that being afraid does not mean being weak, but being human. And when he accepts this, his courage becomes even more genuine. That almost rigid skepticism from the beginning transforms into a healthy prudence that keeps him alert without closing his heart to the world. It is a beautiful evolution to witness. Lucas also starts to look at his friends with a new perspective. He stops competing silently and begins to value the differences of each one. He understands that the group works precisely because each occupies a unique space. And this dissolves that internal shadow of insufficiency that haunted him. Instead of trying to prove something, he tries to contribute. And this completely changes his dynamic with Mike, Dustin, and Will. With everything he has experienced, Lucas matures the way he makes decisions. He begins to reflect more, to weigh more, to observe before acting, but without letting fear paralyze him. It is as if he had finally found the balance between impulse and reason, between emotion and practicality. This emotional integration transforms not only what he does, but who he becomes. He grows on the inside in a way that reflects in each outward choice. And just when this new Lucas starts to take shape, he finds himself facing even deeper decisions that will require not only emotional courage, but purpose. Life invites him to understand who he really wants to be and what impact he wants to leave. And it is at this emotional crossroads that the next part of his journey begins to acquire even more interesting contours. Lucas's experiences end up forming an emotional mosaic so complex that it is impossible for him to remain the same boy from the beginning. Every loss, every fear, every improbable victory adds new layers to his identity. It is as if his heart, once protected by an invisible armor, now had scars that tell stories. And contrary to what many believe, these scars do not harden him, they deepen him. Lucas begins to see the world through much more human lenses. As he grows emotionally, a type of mature calm appears inside him, the kind that does not come from someone who lived little, but from someone who has faced more than he should. He begins to act with a surprising balance for someone so young. His voice gains weight, his decisions gain purpose, and even the way he looks at people changes. It is as if he had found an internal axis that did not exist before. And this axis begins to guide him in a way that even he finds strange. The most beautiful part is how Lucas learns to integrate his own contradictions. He understands that he can be skeptical and still believe, can be afraid and still be brave, can lack answers and still be extremely valuable to the group. This acceptance of his dualities frees him from enormous pressure. He discovers that he no longer needs to pretend to be perfect. He only needs to be truthful. And this transforms him profoundly. The experiences with Max leave him with a sensitivity that becomes almost instinctive. Lucas becomes someone more attentive to silences, to subtle signals, to the emotions people try to hide. He understands from experience that a lot of pain is not loud, it is quiet. And this emotional awareness makes him one of the most human characters in the group. He learns to approach people without invading and to support without suffocating. It is a rare kind of maturity. This emotional growth also makes him firmer with himself. Lucas becomes less reactive and more reflective. He scratches his head, takes a deep breath, thinks before exploding, something unthinkable in the first season. It is almost as if he had discovered an upgraded version of himself and begun using it to navigate life's challenges. He stops acting only to be seen and starts acting because he knows who he is, and that changes everything. Lucas's identity also shifts in how he sees himself within the group. He realizes that he is much more than the responsible guy or the grounded friend. He allows himself to be emotional, to be vulnerable, to be affectionate. This opens space for a version of him that always existed but was hidden by fear of being judged. And when this side emerges, Lucas becomes even more whole, even more complete. Every battle, whether physical or emotional, becomes part of the foundation of his identity. Lucas is constantly reminded that growing up is not an event, but a process. And this process, in his case, involves reframing pain, reorganizing fears, and relearning ways to love. He understands that identity is not something fixed, but something reinvented by what we live. And this perception places him on a path of continuous evolution. And just when it seems that he has found some stability, a new internal movement emerges. The understanding that he is not only the result of what happened to him, but of what he chooses to do with it. This turning point prepares the emotional ground for the last topic, where everything Lucas has lived transforms into purpose and direction for the future. Lucas's future begins to take shape when he understands that he no longer needs to live on emotional autopilot. He realizes that he has choices, and each carries enormous emotional weight. Traumatic experiences, intense bonds, losses, and rescues shape a kind of clarity rarely found in someone so young. He no longer wants to only survive life, he wants to build something within it. And this already changes the path he begins to follow completely. After almost losing Max, Lucas understands that true connections are fragile and valuable at the same time. This creates in him a sense of emotional priority that did not exist before. Now he chooses to be more present, more attentive, more available, almost as if he had learned that loving is not a guarantee, it is a daily decision, and this awareness makes him someone who deeply values every person he loves. At the same time, he begins to develop a sense of purpose that goes beyond survival and friendship. Lucas realizes that he can be a figure of emotional support not only for Max, but for the entire group. He has something few of them possess, a combination of practical courage with emotional intelligence and development. And this makes him someone who, in the future, might lead in a way completely different from the rest of the group. This new Lucas no longer needs to fight for space because he finally understands that his space was never truly at risk. He stops comparing himself so much to his friends and starts looking inward, asking, "Who do I want to be from now on?" This shift is deep and quiet, but completely transformative. He begins making choices, guided more by his heart than by the expectations of others. The interesting thing is that Lucas begins to carry an emotional strength that comes from his falls, not his victories. He knows what it is to lose someone, to feel fear, to question his own worth, and all of this becomes fuel for his maturation. It is as if he had turned his wounds into a kind of flexible emotional armor that does not harden him, but protects him without closing his heart. As he grows, the possibility arises for him to become someone who guides not through authority or impulsiveness, but through sensitivity. Lucas learns that leading is not shouting louder, but understanding deeper, and this ability starts to appear naturally in him. He sees nuances, perceives shifts, reads emotions, because he lived all of it himself, and this prepares him for greater roles that require heart and discernment. His relationship with Max also influences his emotional future. Regardless of what happens, Lucas will carry from her a lesson about love, loss, and courage that will accompany him for his entire life. He discovers that loving involves risk, involves pain, involves surrender, and even so, it is worth it. This is a lesson that few teenagers learn so early, and it places him on a much more solid emotional path for whatever comes next. And the most curious part is that even with all this, Lucas does not lose his essence. He remains that observant, loyal, caring, and somewhat cautious boy. But now he does all of this with a maturity that sets him apart. And as he looks to the future, he realizes he is only beginning to understand his own depth. Exactly the kind of emotional hook that prepares the next stage of this journey that still has much to evolve. At the end of the journey, Lucas Sinclair reveals himself to be much more than the distrustful boy we met at the beginning. He is proof that courage does not come from the absence of fear, but from the constant choice to face it even when everything around seems to fall apart. Lucas grows, matures, and learns that being strong does not mean being inflexible, but knowing when to open the heart, when to trust, when to fight, and when to protect. His story shows that loyalty is not following blindly, but staying beside people, even after disagreeing with them. He learns that vulnerability is also strength, in his friendship with Dustin, in his loyalty to Mike and Will, and in the love full of ups and downs with Max. Lucas is the friend who questions, the young man who makes mistakes, the brother who takes on responsibilities too early, and the hero who never saw himself as one. In the chaos of Hawkins, he becomes someone who faces monsters outside and, mainly, those that live within him.